representing what I imagined would be Charles's talk and Rajiv's talk. And it's not what I imagined. So I'm in a hell of a soup. And soup is not my favorite food. So I'm going to present a rather cynical view of secularism, the secular state. I not to deny what Charles and Rajiv implying, but to say that it's completely unrealistic. The world we live in is not the world that Charles and Rajiv had enumerated, where you get a multiplicity of religions, and somehow or other these religions must accommodate themselves to the reality of the secular state. You see, my argument is simply this. I have the following, there are two important ways in which we can think of secularism. My kind of secularism is a personal secularism, and it's a kind of secularism which Nietzsche defined in Antichrist. You see, where he said that in 1888, is a very radical view of the death of God. He made the point that though God is dead, the way of Christ is still with us, and with all, many people can still imagine Christ as a way of life, you see. So I have a kind of view of secularism of that sort, that is a personal kind of secularism, which is not what we are going to talk about now. Rather, we are going to talk about the secular state, or the kind of political secularism that Rajiv has very nicely enunciated. But political secularism contains what I call, even in the best traditions, such as Charles has enumerated, which I agree with, there's another side to it, you see. And it is that dark side. I'm always given to the dark side. You see, that dark side is what I want to enumerate here. You see, in the first place, I call this the paradox of secularism. That is, secularism requires, to some extent, a willing or sometimes unwilling suspension of the other religions. That requires that expectation simply will not occur. It will not occur in India, and several people of my colleagues, such as Ashish Gandhi and several others, have pointed out the impossibility of that ever succeeding, and with a good old Modi coming into, perhaps into power, and Hindutva coming, I don't see how that form of secularism can last. So I'm saying that the paradox of secularism is in the notion that somehow or other the secular state can act relatively independently of the multiple religious forces that are embedded in the larger context. You see? Now I am suggesting, how could that be? How could certain religions be indifferent if they have been affected by this sort of secular state, you know, in which contains values which I uphold completely, and I hope the rest of the world upholds, with the values of the freedom of speech, of conscience, of association, and so forth. But I think it is a mistake to assume that that model would operate everywhere. It cannot. You see, for what? That if you take certain models, right? I mentioned the case of China. You see, take China. You see, they make no bones of the fact that it is a certain definite kind of secular state in which religion has very little or no place. And then they're making, you know, I might even say they make a few bones out of it, you see. You know? But this problem of so there you have one model, a very powerful model of the secular state in which religion has absolutely no place. You can't even mention the word Dalai Lama. You are in trouble, you see. So it seems to me that that's one model. Another extreme is another model which I absolutely despise, Saudi Arabia. Some of you may be really offended, contacting. I mean, Saudi Arabia is just a reverse. There is no tolerance whatever for secularism or serving the secular state. It eliminates all such notions. So there are two extreme models here, and in between you have sort of European models, of which, since I am also happily both a Sri Lankan and American citizen, of which I am a part, and I really admire some of that. But, big but, those who, like me, who have lived most of our lives in the U.S., knows that there are certain forces right there which are utterly hostile to the notion of a secular state, and the notion that somehow or other, that the notion that in God we trust must be reified, and so forth. They may not succeed. But the fact that they don't succeed does not mean that these extreme radical evangelist groups, you see, are a power that we can just ignore. You see? And who knows, they might even succeed. So is it, I think, most of the other places that we talk of. Even if you go to Italy today, you hardly see any people in the churches. You see? So you might think, wonderful, here's another good example of a secular state. Good. Let us say that there is a rule that they initiate and say, let's abolish the Pope. You'll find all these people saying, what are you up to? This just cannot be done. What about, you see, the past and so forth? Can you just dismiss them? So I'm saying that these are some of the problems that the secular state thought of. I thought that you were going to talk about Asokan model, and I was really very hopeful about it, but I said, please don't mention Tambaya, you see.
Mention you.
Huh?
Mention you.
Yeah. Whatever it is, I thought you were going to talk about a very, very interesting model, what he calls of secularism, that can sort of be sort of an alternative model of secularism, but whether it could be implemented in reality or not, we just don't know. So, when you come to think of our own condition in Sri Lanka, to me, it seems to be a rather dismal prospect. You see. That is, if you look at, all right, let's put it this way. Let us say, for example, that both these people, including myself, put a high value on tolerance. But are there limits to tolerance? What are the limits to tolerance? Can any kind of tolerance be tolerated? You see? Now, I'll give you a good example. In Sri Lanka, prior to the 19th century, women, most of the time, some of the time they didn't, foolish of them, who kept their breasts bare. You see? But I tried to introduce this to Colombo, and the other way, you get lynched. You see? There's no way that that model, however ancient and however respectable it was in the past, has no meaning in the present. So I think the reason is that styles of clothing and so forth are identity markers, and you can't really, dismiss them or get rid of them. And a powerful identity marker of this sort is the burqa. You see, whether we like it or not, in Sri Lanka and perhaps in Europe too, you see, for multiple reasons, the burqa, that is the way a woman who wears herself fully, provokes huge anxiety. You see, and these anxieties can lead to all sorts of reactions, including, physical reactions. So, however much we say, let's be tolerant, the fact of the matter is that there are certain limits to tolerance which certain communities sort of impose. And it is very difficult to get out of it, Now I'm going to really say that this is also true of other things which we are quite intolerant about. Something that is very close to my heart, not that because I am one of them, that is the psychosis. You see, the psychosis are areas in which we get very anxious. Just like the burqa, we get very anxious when we see a schizophrenic woman walking on the road shouting. And we have statements in Sinhalese called Pissage Palamalu. You see, that is, so you get a great deal of anxiety in relation to the psychosis, particularly in Western society and the societies we have unfortunately developed on that model over here. You see, when I was doing field work in Lampala, a very remote area 50 years ago, when you had someone who was would be viewed as a schizophrenic because he was constantly communicating with the gods, and he was inscribing on his breast also some messages to King George and all these people. People here they thought he was crazy. Of course he was crazy, but even in quite a harmless way. The villagers sort of gave him a job. He had to go to the forest, bring various fruits and so forth, and incorporated this man into their social system. This is very, very difficult nowadays to do. And take the case of people who get into the states of possession. They shake and so forth. These damn psychiatrists can't handle that. You see, they're idiots. They don't know how to tackle such a thing. Whereas any village Kapumatya will tell you how to handle that and bring the patient who has suffered from an illness back to normal functioning. You see? So right through, you have these kinds of anxieties which unfortunately are not properly understood. Now let's get, I have more time?
Yes.
I get to green and sometimes not so pleasant land, like Sri Lanka. Now here you find that on one level you are a marvelous example of what you have been saying. The secular model with everything in it. Freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, freedom of this, freedom of that. I have the part of the Constitution written. It's a beautiful piece of work.